show you how to make bias tape and a bias tape maker using a cardboard template and household objects. First, we're going to get some cardboard, and I'm using a recycled tissue box, but you could use a cereal box or any other kind of cardboard that you have around the house, and I'm just going to cut it down. I think a really good width would be about 4 inches wide by maybe 4 inches long, and you could always cut it down later if it's too big or bulky. But for a 2-inch wide bias tape, you are going to need to cut a 2-inch slit. So if it's 4 inches, if your cardboard is 4 inches wide, then it gives you enough room to cut your slit in the middle and still have space on the sides. So there was plastic on the back of my tissue box, and I'm going to be ironing on this, and so I didn't want that to melt the plastic. So I'm cutting away that plastic that was left on the back. And now we're going to make our measurements so that we know where to cut our slits. So I'm using a T-ruler so that it can keep my lines very parallel. And I'm going to use a marker to mark where I'm going to cut. So I'm going in from the edge, and my bias tape is 1 3/4 inches. So I'm trying to make my slits close to 1 3/4 inches. And then I'm made the second line about 1/4 of an inch underneath that. Now I'm going down about an inch, and I'm making a slit about half that size, because once we fold the two sides in towards the center, it'll be half the size of the original bias tape. I'm eyeballing this, and my slits actually could have been a little bit wider, but it worked. But you want it to be big enough to accommodate the width of your folded bias tape. I'm just closing in the sides on my little boxes, and now I'm going to use an X-Acto knife to cut this out. You could use scissors to cut it out, but I find that an X-Acto knife is easier in these small spaces. And you want to make sure that you're cutting on a surface that you won't ruin. So I'm using a self-healing mat underneath my X-Acto knife for my cutting. And I'm just cutting around the edges of this piece of cardboard. So we're going to be feeding the fabric through these holes, and that the holes in this cardboard is going to guide the fabric where to fold. And you'll see in a minute. So now that those are cut out, you want to put your lid back on your X-Acto knife and just pop out those pieces. And there we have it. So I'm just going to clear off my workspace, and I'm going to show you how to iron and fold your bias tape. So I'm going to use a travel iron. Well, actually, it's a travel ironing board. And so normally I would make this on a regular size ironing board where I can iron the full length of this. And my bias tape is 32 inches long. But you know, you could go longer. You just have to re-secure it every now and then. So I'm going to secure this with a pin, and I'm going to get this started by ironing the end of my bias tape. So I'm folding in both edges towards the center, and I'm just going to hold that and carefully iron it without burning myself. And that just gets us started. Now we're going to feed this through the back to the front, through the largest hole, down through the cardboard, and back up, trying to keep it lined up, and it should go off the edge of it on the left side. And then you just want to kind of shimmy it back and forth until it's staying lined up. And then I'm just going to secure that end with that pin, making it go the sharp end of the pin towards the bias tape so that it secures it. Then I just pinch it together, and then I just slide that cardboard back and forth, and it will just help fold it correctly. Then I take my iron and press it. And then we're just going to move down the bias tape, and I just pinch it together again, hold it straight up and down, and then shimmy that cardboard piece back and forth, and it will just fold in your fabric. And then I'll get one more time in before I move my bias tape. just shimmying it back and forth, and then I hold it in place with my hand, my left hand, while I iron with my right. And now I'm just going to move it down and just repin it, pinching it and shimmying it. And this is where if my holes were just a little bit wider, I think it would have fallen in place just a little bit easier. It still works, but it would have worked a little better with a little wider hole. And if you were cutting different sizes of bias tape, you just make your holes to, customize to the size of the fabric that you've cut. So now I'm at the end and I just pulled that off, lined it up. And now you could take this to your machine and just fold it and sew as you go, but I like to press mine in half now. It just makes sewing it so much easier. So I'm just folding and pressing. And I was making some drawstrings, and I was putting right sides together, stitching it, and then turning it right side out. And I was making a lot of masks, and so that was just so labor intensive. It took as much time to make the drawstrings as it did the mask. And so I'm just showing you here that my smaller slits were a little too small. And so now you would want to take this to your machine and stitch that, unless you're going to stitch it onto something, and then you would, you're ready to stitch it. And so I just stitched along the edge of that, and you have your drawstring. Thanks for joining me with this video. I hope you found this informative.